We're 2 months away from Worlds in FTC DECODE season, and some robots are starting to make some really impressive pieces of work. It's something I've been saying all season. This game is defined in the... I'm Coach Pratt, and I'm teaching robotics and design for over a decade now, and I've mentored FTC teams to winning national championships and multiple Inspire Awards. And today we're going to take a close look at some indexing robots and how they actually do their indexing for how your team might consider doing so. Take a look at some different basing strategies that teams are coming up with, and then we'll analyze a couple matches to see what kind of strategies are really starting to dominate this season. So first up here, we've got Team 11848 Spare Parts Robotics. They've got a robot reveal here, but I want to do a little bit of a highlight on theirs, particularly their flipper arms in on their indexer. Now, they did go from a spindexer, and they've got just these little arms here, being able to kick this thing up and in. And one thing I want to mention for teams that are considering doing something like this with a sort of flipper arm mechanism is you need to think about the throughput that you're able to get through on this. And similar to a while back when I talked about a different spindexer design with a ramp on to get higher throughput, some you could consider on this is something like a gear ratio for your servos. This is a rather simple way of getting 3 artifacts up and into your flywheel. But if you were to run these servos either internally in the gearbox itself, so something like a super speed servo or a servo with a relatively higher overdrive setting, or run a gear ratio into that flipper, these artifacts are not very heavy this season. So you really don't need a lot of torque to get them up and moving. And to be able to have a much faster arm lifting up and down would significantly increase your throughput as well. So that's something to think about for teams in that respect. I also want to take a look. I wanted some highlight the team EgoBots 13532. They've put out a recent series here on different reference points on their robot. And I just really like the indexer here that they end up using. They've got a couple boot kickers here from GoBuilda with a belt sitting on the top that we can actually see that the belt and boot kickers move this thing around, move the artifact around in a sort of section to be able to get it into that indexer. I think that's one of the more creative ways I've seen of channeling things down the side. I like having a boot kicker at the bottom. I like having that belt on that top to be able to shuffle these things around, and it looks like it's a pretty successful indexing method for them. They may need to either increase the torque on these because we can see that ball moves a little bit slow as it starts to move along those sides, and I would like to see those artifacts moving just a little bit faster as they are running by, and it does look like it's stopping a bit, or maybe that is some sort of gate that they're stopping in. But to be able to have a slightly higher throughput on that would definitely help. Talking more about some base type prototypes here, we've got Team Impulse 27406, and they've got a quick little pickup to be able to pick up the robot. The thing I like about this one is that it makes it very obvious to the judges that their robot is being fully supported, at least somewhat by those front wheels, but also by that ramp itself. Because some referees, it's tough to get down on that level of the robot and check, are you actually for that base? Are you not? So if it's not clearly obvious, as I've said before, they're not going to give you those base points. To be able to do something like this, it's a pretty quick little kickstand, and I'm seeing more teams starting to adopt a kickstand method. Keep in mind with a kickstand, you also need to make sure you have a partner who is using things like kickstand. However, I am starting to see more and more robots coming up in that kickstand. Next up here, we've got I want you to take a look at an endgame strategy here from this Red Alliance team. Unfortunately, their partner did die out near the end, so they actually were pushing their partner in to be able to at least get a partial park point for that. This is a similar strategy I've seen some teams do inside of their alliances, and they are in their autonomous, they're pushing a robot out of the way and then moving on to be able to make sure they're still getting that reach point. So as you get into regionals, doing strategies like this are things you can consider as you move towards the advancement stage to either the World Championships or a premier event. Another interesting one here, again, EgoBot is coming back up, is we've got a ramp-based autonomous here at the end. It looks like they've got skateboard grip tape. But what's really cool about this is that it's almost like a transformer robot, and that it's capable of pulling everything back inside of itself. And I think that's just a really unique design, something that I have not seen at all this season. I've definitely seen ramps this season, but this is one of the more creative mechanisms to be able to get a ramp that is maybe not something your team might be able to try depending on the kind of fit up you have, but there's a lot of compactness that's going in. And it's certainly an interesting design challenge for this team. So that I want to highlight, just it's really cool. It's very cool engineering going on there. Next up here, I want to take a look at another park. Let's take a look at the Red Alliance in the park here. And again, we're starting to see more of these woodworks here, and that just little tilts up to get their robots up and out. And it looks as though this one here is just literally just a simple bar of U-channel that is just cranking up to be able to tilt up their robot. You have two robots that are able to pitch there, and you've got a full basing that might be a little easier, might end up being a little bit faster than a full liftoff. Now, again, the thing with this kickoff that you end up running that risk of is if your partner doesn't have that kicking base, then they might not be able to do that with you. Next up here, I want to highlight a shooter. We're being some of these coming out of woodwork here. This is Robolobos Lycan Legion 32052. And let's take a look at their autonomous here. Take a look at this robot in the top left is the one to watch. We've seen some shooter designs like this in that the shooter is on linear rails moving around to be able to index itself around. And what's cool about this robot is able to intake on both sides, hold those artifacts in that place, and then just shuffle that turret along to be able to fire along the index with what it is that they are doing. I'm not sure how fast this thing performs in teleop, but as a indexing-based autonomous, super cool. I love seeing it, and it's really interesting that we've gone from seeing no robots having these linear slide-based systems to now in the past week or two seeing 4 or 5 of them starting to come out of the woodwork. I think it's a really creative way of solving some of that problems here. And then I also want to show up here Spark Motors FTC on a shooter front, doing some testing on their throughput. This is sort of an FRC style testing that they get a very large ramp here to be able to see just how much throughput they can get in this. Now, they do start dropping throughput a little bit near the end there and then start doing a little bit of missing. However, that was like 20 artifacts going through, and with a throughput of only having to do 3, you have definitely sufficiently hit that. One thing to consider is if you have this high of throughput, if your hood does not change, more throughput is not necessarily the end-all be-all best thing that's ever going to exist for your robot, because you end up requiring more speed for your motors and more power for your motors to get this thing up to speed, as well as to change any speed. So if you're going to keep the same RPM the entire time, having something with such a high throughput is a relatively good idea. But if you ever need to modulate your RPMs throughout the match, having such a high throughput might not actually be beneficial. It's another thing why you might want to try to consider actually doing a bit of a gear reduction for your flywheel. A lot of teams are running bare 6,000 motors. In my opinion, I don't think you need to have a full 6,000 motor. I think you could probably break it down to like a 4,000 RPM motor and have like, what is that, a 1 to 0.75 ratio, something like that, would be a really beneficial thing for you to do to be able to increase your torque, make your flywheels a little bit more snappy just by changing the size of your pulleys. Next up here, I want to talk about an auto. This is from Team 22131 Traffic Cones and 16010 Astra Machina. And they've got a pretty phenomenal looking autonomous here. I think it's got about 19 artifacts when it's all said and done. This is something really for teams to think about. They end up shooting a lot more than 19, but we end up having 1, 2 of those not able to make itself in because they are bouncing out of that goal at the end. Not a ton, but it is interesting seeing that team's traffic cone is coming into that back corner. There's another 2 missed from that as well. So of total shots being shot here in autonomous, I believe that was 24 or 25 shots. They missed 5 with that. Pretty impressive to be able to have. I believe that was 18 scored artifacts in the end. To be able to work together, this is really something that teams are going to have to do when it comes to running things like playoffs and having their partners, is having multiple autonomouses set up that play well with each other. And that's something we're really starting to see moving up into this season. Next up here, I just want to do some match analysis, and we'll talk more about the teleop inside of this match here. This was the GA state record. Apologies, I'm not actually sure what state GA is. Perhaps that's Georgia. Oh, it says right here is the Georgia Championship. And let's just talk a little bit about what seems to be winning games and some things that might actually shift this up. The alliance here to watch is the Blue Alliance, particularly this robot up here, 14468. I believe this is Team Undefined. Let's double check that. Yes, it is undefined robotics. And they've got quite a really narrow robotics chassis coming up. And I think one thing that it makes it more beneficial for you running into things like your base, but you'll notice that they struggle to pick up some artifacts throughout the match as time goes on, particularly next to that gate. If they're not perfectly well lined up, you'll see that quite a few of those artifacts end up getting pushed out of the way of their robot. And I think that's something you see with robots with very narrow chassis, that it does make it a lot harder for the robot to be able to move around. And being able to move around and pick things up easily for your driver, in my opinion, really seems to be something that is starting to win some of these matches, particularly at really high levels of play. Now, I say winning some of these matches, I mean, clearly this robot is doing, or this blue team is doing really well. Now they're up to 155 points with 50 seconds left. Very solid work. My point being more here is up at the super high levels of play, being able to make it a lot easier to pick up. And when I talk about super high levels of play here, we've got another match here, and the alliance to watch is, I believe, the Red Alliance, 19500, yes. So this is team 19498 and 19500. Again, we're going to take a look from the teleop section onwards and take a look at this robot up here. Let's see if we can pause that. That is 19500. And just talking about the throughput that they're picking up on that robot. So you can see it's still got quite a narrow base similar to that other robot. But what's more important here is they have a much wider intake up at that front to make it easier for them to be able to go pick up some of those artifacts. And because of that, they're able to start kind of walking away with the score a little bit here. Another thing that's quite important looking at 19500 here is just the speed of their drivetrain and just how much easier it is for them to get around the field as time goes by. The faster you can get in to be able to open up your gate and be able to cycle more artifacts, of course, the more artifacts you get in. That is, a bit of that is obvious, the faster you can move. However, lightening up your chassis, getting a much wider intake, making it easier on your drivers, it's something I've been saying all season. This game is defined in the teleop period, and we're really seeing that autonomous does help. But when you start maxing out around 18, 19 artifacts from even some of the best teams in the world, pairing together with really highly optimized autonomouses, having much, much higher throughput on that teleop and making it easier on your drivers to be able to go in and get those scores that they need to get is really what starts to decide some of those matches. So if you're looking for more robotics resources, CAD files, code snippets, things like that, sample engineering portfolios, you can consider joining my community down below. If you have some robots content from your FTC team that you think would be worthwhile for other people to share, or you want me to analyze something or be featured on a future FTC Fridays, there's a Google form that you can submit down below. And as always, best of luck out there this season.